Well, first of all, let me thank the Intelligence Squared for having this debate. And I personally, as an African, I find this very amusing that I could see proponents for and against aid. And I think those of us on this side really believe that you have to separate the humanitarian impulse from the record of aid itself. I mean, on the humanitarian impulse, we all want to help. As a matter of fact, a lot of people will say that it is the moral obligation of the rich to help the poor. But the record on aid has been a disaster. And that's why a lot of us, those of us who are on this particular side of the table, want to change. And what we're saying is that, look, the current system of aid harms Africa. And I think John McArthur said that, no, there are a new group of people, he calls them the cheaters. I disagree. And he believes that aid can be reformed and help the African people. But fact of the matter is, more than $600 billion has been poured into Africa since 1960 with nothing to show for except a multitude of black elephants and crumbled infrastructure and decaying buildings. There are a couple of misconceptions about aid that we need to clear up. First of all, foreign aid is not free. It is a very soft loan, which is given to a government at concessional rates. Now, the second thing about aid is that aid is tied. 80% of U.S. aid to Africa is spent right here in America, on American contractors, American suppliers, and so forth. French aid is even worse. When China gives you aid, they don't just send you the materials, but they also bring in their labor and materials and set up camps for their workers, for example. Now, one of the things which has been missing in this piece is that nobody asked, whom at all do we want to help in Africa? Nobody asked that question. It is assumed that if we give aid to Africa, automatically it will help lift the people out of poverty. And this is one of the reasons, it's one of the fallacies of aid. It's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to come up with success stories of aid in Africa. We can find countries that the U.S. aid has been able to reform politically. We can't find countries where U.S. aid has been able to reform economically. Right now, as we speak, out of the 54 African countries, only 16 of them are democratic. Less than 10 can be characterized as economic success stories. Forget about intellectual freedom. That is in the Stalinist era. What Africa needs, and as a matter of fact, I testified before the Senate of Canada this past June, and what I laid before them, yes, they want to help Africa, but they themselves came up with a report, Canadian report, Senate report, of 40 years of Canadian aid failure in Africa. What to do? Now, we're not suggesting that don't help Africa. But if you want to help Africa, please, for Pete's sake, ask the Africans what they want. Don't assume that you know better than the Africans. What Africans want, 3 things: reform, reform, reform. Reform the abominable political systems, reform the abominable economic systems and intellectual systems. Give Africans the freedom so that they themselves can decide what is good for them. Such freedoms are lacking in Africa. So to me, this debate really is currently the aid system is rotten. It's not helping the African people. And if you want to help the African people, what I'll propose to you, and this is what our side is coming up with, is smart aid. Smart aid is that which empowers the African people to instigate reform from within. The ruling elites are not interested in reform. We all know what the problems are: bloated bureaucracies, corruption, We want to trim government expenditures in Africa. The elites are not interested. You ask them to cut government spending, and they will set up a ministry of less government spending. Now, this is the hippo generation. They are not interested in reform. You ask them to curb corruption, and like in Kenya, they will set up an anti-corruption commission. But then, when it sniffs too close, they sack the corruption czar and shut the whole thing down. Africans know what they want. And if you want to better help the African people, ask them. Thank you.